response is Ron Coleman. He's a partner at the Dillon Law Group, who's known for his First Amendment advocacy and his litigated cases all the way up to the Supreme Court. So, Ron, it's a pleasure to have you on the program tonight. I want to just get your input on this impeachment proceeding right now, because, of course, we've gone through this before. I feel like I have to warn everybody that this isn't a repeat episode from a year ago. But what's your response to the way that things have been developing when it comes to the Democrat efforts to impeach President Trump?
Well, it is almost looks as if they're panicked about something. This is somebody who is going to be leaving office in a week, in small change. Why would you impeach someone except for retribution or as some sort of warning or an attempt to remove him from having that week's worth of power? What did they think he might do in that week? It certainly isn't going to be to hold another rally. So it looks political, and it is.
And I want to build on that a little bit too, because it now appears that some Republicans are kind of jumping on the bandwagon. We just showed Senator Ben Sasse saying that he's open to the possibility. Is there part of this that perhaps, for example, if the House votes to impeach and the Senate votes to remove, they could add a sanction on there that would say that he can't hold public office in the future, correct? Could this be about 2024?
People have said that, and that's why there's been some suggestion that they might end up actually having it after he leaves office. That seems to have been something that the Democratic leadership is actually not interested in, because, again, it sounds like more of a panic sort of thing than something. I mean, what do they have to fear from Donald Trump holding office? He's the worst person who ever lived. He certainly couldn't win an election, could he?
Well, and I think that's the argument that they're scared of. I think that, for example, a lot of Democrats are voicing the concerns that maybe when 2024 does come around, that President Trump could pull off that victory. I think that's where the concerns are coming from, because if you look at the rest of the Republican Party, there's a little bit of a battle taking place as to who the future is going to be. And I think that when you look at the future of the Democratic Party, I mean, I don't think that after Joe Biden, many people are very confident, and I don't think many people are even confident in Joe Biden. So do you think that this effort to remove is just that, just a political stunt?
Yes.
Easy enough.
Absolutely.
Well, with that being said, then, what does this do for Democrats going into 2022? Do you think that this is something that the American people will look at and say, you know what, I'm sick of this obstruction, I'm sick of everybody just always playing politics? Do you think that'll help out efforts to take back the House or the Senate in 2022?
I think it'll help if there's some kind of election reform. If some court eventually rules somewhere that there is some law that applies to voting, which courts seemed very unwilling to do during and immediately after the election, then everything you're talking about makes sense, and then politics matter. Politics are not going to matter one bit if voting is allowed to take place in manifestly unfair conditions, which is exactly what happened in the last election. To the extent that there are changes made as a result of either legislation, political changes in the states, or eventually some kind of ruling by the Supreme Court, then I think your question has some legs, yes.
Well, and that does bring up another point, I suppose, too, is we now know that Republicans did take back some seats in the House. They essentially lost the Senate, even though it's a tie, but it means that Kamala Harris will be the tiebreaker right there. But how can Republicans really pursue any substantive voter concerns, or I guess reforms is the way that I want to put it, because they don't have the power in Congress, they no longer have the White House. It seems like the only avenue that they could go through would be through the courts or the Supreme Court. Is that really a viable option?
Well, there are a couple of things. There are still cases pending before the Supreme Court, and there are cases pending in the lower courts that will reach the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did issue an opinion, not an opinion, but I think an order earlier today, where it announced that it would not expedite consideration of any of the cases before the inauguration. That's actually not too surprising, given everything else we've seen from that court. But over the months to come, there will be a number of things that will be adjudicated, and some of them, or only perhaps one of them, could make a very big difference. Congress is not a foregone conclusion, because if Republicans are smart enough to at least put the issue on the table and to suggest legislation, who are going to be the people who are going to want to go on record as having voted against voting requirements? And then there's the fact that local the states control the voting process. In Pennsylvania, in particular, there is still a Republican majority in the legislature. Now, they didn't step up the way they may have and could have, and maybe even made a gigantic historical difference, or by decertifying the election before the deadline in December. But nonetheless, they have to be aware, and many of them have indicated that they are aware that their constitutionally mandated legislative prerogative with respect to voting regulations was usurped by the Attorney General and Governor of that state. So lots of things are in play, and we should not make the mistake of assuming that any past performance is a guarantee of anything. It's a whole new world politically.
No, I think you're exactly right. I'm kind of sick of looking at the past because it seems like every single news headline that we have nowadays, I have to put the word unprecedented in front of it. This unprecedented pandemic, this unprecedented impeachment. It's getting a little bit tiresome, to be honest, but I guess it's good for the news industry. But when it comes to the Republican efforts, too, I wanted to focus on voter reforms a little bit further because you're right, but I don't even think that a bill would be brought up in the House, for example, or the Senate. I'm not sure exactly procedurally how that works, but when it comes to public pressure, has the Republican Party been effective, would you say, in really making these cases, making the arguments that they do have concerns about voter fraud enough where the American people will care and come on board and maybe make some changes in future elections?
The Republican Party has been astonishingly ineffective. I would say, maybe I shouldn't say astonishingly, because they have a sort of history of not being able to make those sort of cases. I say astonishingly, though, because of how important it is and how well prepared for it you would have expected him to be. And my partner, Harmy Dillon, has spoken about this at great length, probably on your air as well as many other opportunities. She's been frustrated, and she's moving up in the leadership of the party, and hopefully there will be changes that will be better prepared for that sort of thing. I don't want to say that there weren't efforts made. I don't want to say that there wasn't preparation. I was deployed. Many of the people that I work with worked on campaign litigation, but it was definitely too little, too late. It was highly disorganized. But in terms of the public pressure point, which is really what your question was, there were too many chiefs and not enough Indians, if I can use that old-fashioned metaphor. Everybody wanted to be a spokesman. There were actually, I was overwhelmed, even though I wasn't in any kind of leadership position, with lawyers begging me for information about how they could throw themselves into the fight. But it was a disorganized, we weren't ready. But frankly, at the end of the day, the courts weren't ready to hear us, no matter how good of an argument we made. One of my friends on Twitter recently said, I just don't think anyone in the Republican Party dreamt that no matter how over the top the irregularities and the nonconformance with law and the ignoring of court orders would be, that no court would want to entertain the issue.
Yeah, and it's a good point, too, because you're right. When we look back at the weeks after the election, for example, we saw that Democrats did have a coordinated effort with their typical players, Mark Elias, battling it out in each one of the states. And then on the Republican side, I think you're right. There were a lot of voices that seemed to be competing for airtime, and as a result, sometimes the allegations got more salacious and kind of overshadowed the actual claims that might have merit in the court system. I think you're right to say that. But Ron Coleman, it was a pleasure having you on this program. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Welcome. Thank you.